Welcome everybody to episode 6 of Mona Lisa Has No Eyebrows. So we're back with May and Yeltsin and myself, Stephanie. And so we're going to explore 3 different facts about 3 more artists today.
I picked Asco Art Collective. Asco. Asco is like in Spanish, it just means like sort of like a feeling of repulsiveness, just kind of feeling like nausea, like that sort of feeling. So I think that's like already, I think the name kind of gets me. I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of hardcore. It's interesting. So this is a group of artists and an art collective that pretty much ran in from the 70s. They are Los Angeles locals, and they were mostly active doing performance work, like a lot of installations. Of course, they had different styles of work and that sort of thing. So my art fact was that they had this interesting performance and piece that was called Spray Paint Lakma. And what it was that, and what's interesting is that there's kind of like a story behind it as well, was that a lot of their work was somewhat, well, not somewhat, but it was politically and racially sort of motivated because during that time, there was a lot of pressure from the Vietnam War, and a lot of their work was sort of surrounding this idea that a lot of sort of people from the Latino community were being sent to Vietnam to die, essentially, and so there's a lot of pieces that kind of like pull from that and kind of talk about this sort of idea that 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 Latino art or Chicano art is very like it's high art, and that so part of this piece was that there's a controversial sort of curator at LACMA that sort of barred their work and said that it just wasn't important, that essentially something along the lines of like comparing them to Diego Rivera or something like that, saying that Chicano work isn't high art, it's mostly muralism, and it's work that belongs outside, essentially outside of the galleries and outside of the art. So in response to that, they went to LACMA and they spray painted LACMA. So that's the sort of virtual background behind me. And they spray painted their names, and there's this sort of conceptual side to it that I found really interesting. It was that that they spray painted their names, and it had this sort of double meaning that it's sort of like a way of marking territory in the barrio, like in sort of like the neighborhood, and that sort of thing. And so what they were doing was essentially marking their territory on LACMA in an unconventional way, and showing their art. So on the flip side, in 2011, they were admitted in a retrospective at LACMA, the same museum, and they and their work was regarded as of course important and integral to you know to the Los Angeles community, and adds so much to the culture as well. So I found it interesting. It's like spray painting a museum takes you to the museum. Another thing too, as the art collective, you can see, I don't know if I can disappear, but it has the artist names, Willie Heron, Herregamboa Jr., and if I can, and Gronk. Yeah, Gronky, as he writes, I think here. It's so hard to kind of get away from there. But there's a missing member, and that's actually Patsy Valdez. So you might notice that just part of their art collective and a lot of their work, Patsy Valdez just presents herself, and I always thought that was really cool. So she's always seems to be like the centerpiece in a lot of their group work, and I find that very performative and cool. I just think that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did not know about this collective until you presented the fact, Yeltsin. So thank you again for, having me learn something new, especially for such an important art collective. And I was reading about that, when they spray painted LACMA. So by the virtue of them having spray painted LACMA, that is a piece of Chicano art now. That is a legit piece of Chicano art, and it is really interesting how one of the things that they did, which I really liked, was the No Movies series, where they would just make their own movies out of whatever. And, they talk about how ironic it is. They're in the shadow of the Hollywood sign, and yet there is so little Chicano representation, in mainstream media. And I mean, not only art, but yeah, like anywhere really, except as sort of the invisible visibles, like making everything work and yet not being acknowledged or appreciated. So yeah, definitely very important. And another fun fact, Mr. Gronk, I don't know if it's Mr. Gronk, but he's actually the juror at the Tag Gallery California Open show that's going on right now. I got the email for that, and I opened it up, and I looked, and I saw that name Gronk, and I'm like, why is that so familiar? And then because I had just read about Gronk like the day before.
How funny.
So he's still active and making art, and now he is sort of in the upper echelons of the LA art scene, which is great. I'm glad, that's that they've finally been recognized like that. I don't know what the other people have been up to. So what did you find out, May?
Well, I was watching some interviews that they had recorded of them, and they were talking about their origin story, about how they were really mistreated as young children in elementary school. I think it was either Willie or one of the other, not Gronk. What is the other? There's Gronk, Willie, Patsy, and
Harry?
Who is it?
Harry?
Harry Gamora?
Harry.
Gamboa?
It might have been Harry. He told this really upsetting racist story where when he was in elementary school, he didn't know how to speak English just yet. And so the very first thing they made him do was make a dunce hat and write dunce in Spanish on it and then place it atop his head. And the teacher told him, once you learn how to speak English, you can take that hat off. And I was shocked. And I think it just really goes back to this world that we used to live in the 70s, when Chicano artists were oppressed, and not even artists, just Chicano people. So I took a lot of inspiration, like Stephanie was saying, from learning about this collective. And then kind of going back to what Yeltsin was saying about the Vietnam War, Gronk actually has this quote where in relation to discussing why they chose that the word for their collective, is that the quote is, a lot of our friends were coming back in body bags and were dying, and we're seeing a whole generation come back that weren't alive anymore. And in a sense, that gave us nausea. That is Asco in a way. And so it's interesting how it's also very depressing and saddening how they had all of this oppression and all of this just really terrible things happen to them. And they turned it into this collective where they put power to the word of it. And this sort of things that they started doing together as a collective in their early days. Like there was one, I think it was Patsy and Gronk, that they were just talking a lot about how no one was giving us shows. And so we put our own show on. And so there was a performance piece called The Instant Mural, where Gronk had taped Patsy to a wall. And that was the piece. So I thought that was really inspirational to hear, the really upsetting origin story of where they all came from, this various, oppression, systematic oppression approach, and turned it into something that we're now talking about today, like even with the piece that they did with LACMA, now we're talking about it because of their approach to wanting to show themselves in the art world.
Yeah, it was also really interesting to find out about how, there was sort of the new guard, right? Some of the older artists, and they were feeling like, hey, don't get too crazy. When people think of Chicano art, it is murals, it is Diego Rivera, that kind of stuff. Social change has to come more gradually, so it's kind of what a lot of like what happened with African Americans, especially during the same time too, for similar reasons, same idea, like a lot of them having to go to war, and then so many dying and being incapacitated and all those kinds of things, and still not getting respect and due back home. So it's sort of like, they realize, no, we can't wait for people to give us things. Like, we have to take it. We have to do it on our own. And it's that kind of spirit that is so inspiring. So often we do hold back, right? We feel like, oh, we got to wait for permission. We have to be acknowledged. It's like, and these people said, no, screw that. Like, we're just going to go ahead and do it. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. I'm just so impressed by these young people. I mean, they were so young when they started this collective. So I find a lot of inspiration. I'm curious, Yeltsin, how did you find out about Asco?
It's kind of interesting. They went to Otis, and I went to Otis. So it's I studied community arts, and in one of the classes we just learned about Asco. We learned about a couple of different sort of like art, sort of, I don't know, like cornerstones of like Los Angeles. And it was just very performance based. I think it was avant-garde and just interesting. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Do you know anything more about what the members are up to now? I mean, aside from Gronk.
Gronk I follow on Instagram.
Oh man, okay.
So it's like he's still with it, still posting sort of like, I think, like latte pictures and stuff, but paintings and stuff. I feel like I've seen a couple of like later things from the other artists though. I forget what though, but I've seen Patsy in a sort of, I think in a different light. I forget where. If it might just be from the sort of retrospective, the sort of exhibition they might have had.
Oh, okay. So get this. Harry Gamboa, right now, he has an exhibit at the Getty Center through October 10th.
Wow.
Called Photo Flux Unshuttering LA. And he is the co-director of program in photography and media at Cal Arts.
Oh, there you go.
So he is active. And let's see, Willie, he is a founding member of the punk band Los Illegals. And Patsy, let's see. Okay, so she was part of the Pacific Standard Time in 2017, 2018. So it seems she's pretty active. And she's on Twitter.
Oh.
And she's received some prestigious, in 2000 she was at a gallery in Santa Monica. 2006 she was at the Angels Gate Cultural Center in San Pedro, and 2011 she was at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. So looks like they've all gone on to be still very active.
I do have a last thing actually.
Sure.
So this was kind of random. Like, I had a friend, I was talking with a friend about like, so LA used to have murals on the freeways.
Yes.
And he was talking about just growing up. He was like, oh, I miss those. I used to look at there was like the sort of rendition of like the LA Marathon, but it was in the future. So apparently one of the Asco members, I forget who, I do have the article, but I totally forgot. But it prompted me to be like, what did happen to those? Who painted those? So I started actually looking into that. So one of the Asco members did actually paint one of those murals on the freeway. But unfortunately, it was it just gets hit by a bunch of sun, and cars drive by, and just tons of stuff. So they so unfortunately, and of course, I think the purpose of like kind of looking this up was also it was vandalized a lot, and he just got tired of cleaning it up. So now it's like they took them down, and I guess without even asking. So like they just painted over them. There was a bit of that too. So it's kind of interesting, but I think they painted the murals for every freeway that leads to the Coliseum for the Olympics. So this year is an Olympics year. I don't know. It's just full circle.
I don't know if the LA Olympics happens again. Who knows? Maybe they'll commission more murals. They probably will. I mean, because now like murals are like bigger than ever, right? With all the powwow and other mural projects, it seems like there's murals everywhere, which is great. I mean, I love seeing that, and I think it'll afford more opportunities for more recent artists to get in there. It is kind of interesting how those murals, some of them made by members of like the local community, who themselves have like tagged and stuff, got, their stuff got tagged. But a long time passed. I think, after a while, people don't remember who they are or the significance of it or whatever. So,
well, yeah, I think it's interesting. It's nice that murals are becoming a little bit more commonly seen as fine art, almost to a sense, because a lot of street artists, I feel, the reason local street artists will tag a mural that has been commissioned by the city from maybe a more well-known artist is because of this idea that, oh, hey, you're bringing in an artist that doesn't even live here to create a piece of art, and totally discrediting all of the people that do it because they live in the city and they make artwork too. So, it's kind of like powwow is cool, and it's great that we're celebrating muralists, but at the same time, it's a really powerful thing to have to also contend with in regards to like, well, we should also be giving voice to street artists that actually, live in the city and also work in the same, art technique in a sense.
Yeah, I do know that they bring in artists from all over, because they want the notoriety, they want like a famous name or whatever. These sort of rock star muralists that come into town, do their thing, and then take off.
Right. Yeah. But it kind of circles back to this whole idea of, when was it Willie or Harry that went to LACMA and he walked around in LACMA, didn't see any Chicano artist, and then went and talked to the curator and asked, hey, where's the Chicano art? And the curator said, oh, well, they don't make art that would go inside a museum, full circle, like, well, actually they do. And so let's do tagging basically on LACMA. And yeah, so it's like we're still dealing with this issue, even though the artists from this collective have gotten a little bit more established and have been doing projects and becoming a little bit more commemorated by the art world and recognizing them. We're still having the same issue where people are still being oppressed. And
I mean, the problem hasn't been solved, It's kind of like, when Obama got elected, people were like, we solved racism, or something, and not even close, as we know. So I do wonder if that curator that made the comment was still around when Asco got their, the retrospective exhibition.
Yeah.
That would have been kind of awesome. Okay, so I have behind me the work of Artemisia Gentileschi. I think that's how you pronounce it. And one of the very few noted and notable female Renaissance painters, artists. And So I found out about her. I mean, I don't think I even learned about her in art history class. She never really came up. I think I just happened to read about her somewhere. And of course, her most famous painting probably now is the one behind me here called Judith Beheading Holofernes. And so there's Judith, and then there's Holofernes. Oh, uh. So,
Nice.
dying a horrific death, being beheaded by this very strong looking woman. And so what little I, learned about her was that, she had been raped when she was 17 by this artist who was her father's guest. So her dad was a famous painter. So that's how she became an artist herself, even though apparently she was illiterate until her 20s, because they didn't bother with educating women that way. But since her dad was an artist, he just let her draw and learn from him and that kind of stuff. So she learned how to draw and paint before she could even read and write. And so he had brought this guy into their home, and it was sort of a careerist move on her dad's part, because this guy, I think his name was Tassi, was a famous artist, and he was hoping that Tassi would bring him along on this commission. So that was sort of the reason why this guy was here. And then, he raped Artemisia. It was not consensual at all, but afterwards, he had promised that he would marry her, and the prospect of getting married, even to her rapist, was actually like not a bad deal for a woman at that time, which says a lot. and so she said okay, and so she actually had a few more consensual encounters with him. So I learned all this just recently because I was flipping through the New Yorker, and I came across this article about her, this very good article, and how she's being reevaluated. So because of this rape and the subsequent trial that was brought forth by her father, so this guy had said he was going to marry her, and he didn't. He skipped town and didn't really have to suffer any consequences. And so the father brought him to trial because it was a matter of family honor, not necessarily just because of the, violence done to his daughter. That's not as important as being dishonored. And so, she was questioned under torture, basically. Different accounts say that they use thumb screws on her and stuff, but in this one article, it said it's actually cords wrapped around her fingers that are tightened. So it is kind of like a thumb screw like device. And so she had to deny it. And so, they believed her. But again, he escaped punishment. So after learning about the rape, when I saw this painting, you think like, oh yeah, of course, she's pissed. She's very angry. But it kind of turns out that wasn't the only defining thing about her life. There's a lot more to her and her art than just the rape that happened when she was 17 and just this one painting also. So I'm gonna leave it there. If you guys have, if you want to interject at this point.
Yeah, I was reading a lot of articles about her, and it started to kind of upset me that each article kept saying, "Oh, it wasn't her rape that got her famous. It was actually that she actually had talent." And it's like, well, yeah, because it shouldn't have been like the reason for why she became well known. And it almost makes it feel like, well, maybe just don't write about, extensively about the rape then, because if you're saying, oh, this was part of it, but it wasn't what made it, it's like, okay, so then leave it like that. But anyways, moving past that, I did learn a lot of really interesting things about her. So I guess there is the oldest surviving painting of hers that is really well known and seen as a professional painting she made when she was 17, which is crazy. And it's titled Susanna and the Elders. And if you look it up, you look at it and you say, a 17-year-old painting this, amazing, just fantastic. But I guess even at age 15 is when she began, producing professional work. These paintings just don't exist anymore. And then in regards to the painting that you have as your background stuff, it turns out that that painting ended up becoming a symbol for the hashtag Me Too movement. So whenever, or not whenever, when this event was happening, this painting would come back up, and it kind of cited that this would be something that stands in solidarity with the Me Too movement, which does tie it back into her rape. But it really is like such a powerful painting in itself that you can feel the emotion that she had to carry through the painting. And I also wanted to know a little bit about, there was an article that she was mentioned in titled, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? And I feel like we talked a little bit about this in the Ana Mendieta episode, where it's all about this idea of, oh, well, there weren't as many great women artists, and why is that? And, we can tie it back to this whole system of oppression, and where women weren't allowed or weren't given the opportunities to become as famous or well known as Michelangelo and Giovanni and all and so on. So I was really glad that you had put this fact in for this episode, because I didn't know much about her. I did know about that painting. I remember in one of my art history classes, I did have to memorize that painting. But yeah, having read her origin story and all the things that she overcame, and her sheer talent in the painting itself is really quite fantastic. So I really enjoyed reading up about her.
The first thing that I kind of saw was that Google had honored her on her 427th birthday.
Oh, cool.
So like Google does that thing where they change their homepage and they honor someone. And every now and then I see it. Sometimes I don't. So I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. So I looked a little deeper, and Google has like a whole feature in their arts and culture sort of like section, which is essentially it's like high resolution images of just historical paintings, and there's articles and all kinds of stuff, and it, of course, you can visit virtually and that sort of thing. So I was looking into that, and I saw that piece, like I saw the sort of the Judith beheading Holofernes. I don't know if I said it right, but I'll say what was interesting. They actually mentioned a lot about this in their sort of arts and culture section. But as I say that painting, I also think to myself, like, in that time, that sort of like that sort of era, there was a lot of the paintings were religious subject matters that, but they weren't directly religious. They had sort of like this sort of second meaning to them that was more meaningful towards their culture, like the sort of Rome, the sort of Renaissance sort of like style, like and the sort of classical style, I'll say. So I found that interesting, and so I didn't know anything about this subject really. So I looked into it. I was like, what is the story about? Like, how does this picture come about? And so it's like, it's a biblical story from the Old Testament. And it's of Judith. Judith is someone who served her people by seducing Holofernes, and essentially sliced his head off while he was sleeping or something. What I found interesting and also a little kind of odd is when you take like an art history class, I feel like you see a lot of paintings, and the hardest one that the hardest art history class I've taken is probably the sort of like Renaissance era painting. There's a lot, and a lot of them are also sort of like the subject matter is very religious at times, or most of the time, and there's all these double meanings that kind of present themselves. And I just found it so interesting that Caravaggio had the same exact painting, like the same exact subject matter, but the woman in that painting is sort of cutting the head off in such a way that just doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel violent. It feels very dainty. Whereas this one feels passionate. It like you could feel the sort of like the blade cutting. So they mentioned this in the whole Google Arts and Culture thing. Essentially, Artemisia, she painted herself. Like the self-portraits that she made garnered enough attention to be collected and regarded by many different people. So she was the first woman to be admitted to the Academy of Drawing and Painting, and that's a big deal. So and there's just a lot of those sort of things that sort of present themselves that I found interesting. That so she's the subject of like a lot of her own paintings, so that sort of like leads into this painting where it was, you know, following up this sort of like occurrence that happened, and that she seemingly painted herself doing this. I feel that there's a double meaning that, you know, you'd have to be there to really know what it's really about. And part of that I find is that they describe the dude. I have no idea what his name is. In fact, who cares? Agostino. But it's the sort of thing where apparently he doesn't look like that. He had like maybe a goatee, but apparently he was supposed to be kind of like plump, like a little bigger. And I don't know, there was just a mention to that where it's interesting that maybe like it is kind of like, who cares who that person was? Like I don't have to paint this person to face that all the time. I don't know. I thought it was really cool.
So yes, that Caravaggio painting. So I had to look that up. What a difference. And I can't wait till I make the video and I can show you guys the side by side, because the woman in Caravaggio's painting, first of all, looks like a teenager. She's wearing like this white frilly satin dress or something. And she's doing the thing, but she's kind of got this look on her face like, ew, you know, like just weak sauce. And the article in the New Yorker mentions how in the Caravaggio painting, the Holofernes is sort of more central in composition, and Judith and the servant is kind of off to the side. So clearly you can already see the bias here. And so this subject, as you said, it was a very popular subject. Many artists have done this. So it is really hilarious to see, you know, all throughout the ages, and also because, you know, Judith is always wearing like the costume of her time. So like like in some medieval woodcut, you see her wearing like the pointy medieval hat. And you know, other ones like she's, you know, wearing like kind of this Renaissance type dresses. And it was also a subject that Klimt painted a few times. And so of course Judith looks like one of Klimt's women. And yeah, it, like you said, it is not necessarily just about the story, but it is a reflection of our times. Kind of like, you know, movies, like you watch period movies, but clearly you can tell it was done in the 70s or 80s or 90s or whatever, right? Because they just can't help but insert what is happening in their time into the costume and the look and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. And so after this whole trial and all that, she went on with her life. She was able to marry. Her father arranged the marriage with this other guy who's known as a minor artist, and they moved to Florence. So she moved to a new town, and now, you know, being a married woman, she could now socialize and circulate. And the scandal was kind of behind her. You know, I mean, everybody knew about it, of course, but she was able to get past it in her own time. And she was probably one of the few women artists who were, you know, recognized in her time. She was celebrated and, you know, accepted into the prestigious academy. She had many commissions and all this kind of stuff. I mean, she lived a really full life. She had 5 kids. She had an affair. Like, I mean, she just like went for it.
I also found out, so, you know, to her success even after death, in 2018, a painting that shows David sitting triumphantly next to Goliath's severed head, long attributed to the Baroque artist Giovanni Francesco, came to auction, and a collector at an auction in Munich acquired it for just $119,000. But in a subsequent forensic examination of the canvas, the London-based conservator Simon Gillespie discovered that Artemisia's signature was actually on the hilt of David's sword. And so it turns out that it was actually her painting. And so now it's actually worth several $million. So, you know, just further to credit her, what an amazing woman painter of the time.
Even though she was noted in her time, she was sort of forgotten for a while there, for a couple hundred years. And then she came back, and now, as you said, most recently, she was sort of like the face of the Me Too movement. And you know, her time came around again, which I think is really remarkable, and just amazing talent, incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it's like, you know, that kind of painting, it's so astonishing even now, you know, after hundreds of years of this kind of painting happening. It's you can really tell when there's a true talent there. And there was a really funny part in that article where they talk about her father, who was a very famous artist, and they talk about how, you know, he could render fabric and cloth, you know, like he painted this thing that looked like you could just get in there. But then you look at the breasts of a woman that he painted and they look comically perky, they said. It was like, clearly he didn't quite understand, you know, the physics of a real female body, or never bothered to learn, but he could paint the hell out of a cloth though. But the thing about the forensics revealing that it was her painting kind of leads into your thing, May.
Yes. All right. So let's dive in. So my fact is about Rene Magritte, surrealist master Rene Magritte. And so the fact is, a section of a lost painting by Rene Magritte was discovered beneath another of his works, which will not be physically uncovered. And so the backstory is that there was this painting titled The Enchanted Pose, and it was these two figures with this light sky blue background, very monochromatic figures within like this small enclosed scene, I suppose. It was exhibited in 1927, but it was later returned to Rene, so it never sold. And then about 5 years later, it vanished, and Rene Magritte passed away in 1967. So we never figured out what happened to this painting. And then many years later, it had turned out that there was a curator at the Norwich Castle Museum that had uncovered, through curation processes, she had noticed that there was some painting on the backside where the canvas was folded over on the stretcher bars. And she thought, that's odd. That's not typically how this tends to go. And so she discovered that one of the quarters from this previous painting that we had never been able to uncover, The Enchanted Pose, was actually painted on top of after Rene Magritte had cut it down into quarters and then later painted on top of in these 4 different paintings. And then they've, you know, been sent out into the world into all these other areas. So I will leave it there.
So what I read was he had cut the original painting into quarters because he wanted to make new art, but like he couldn't afford or he didn't want to spend the money on new canvases. And I was like, what? and then I started reading a little bit more about him, and he never gained like a lot of fame and wealth like while he was really active. I read that like he really became very popular in the 60s, like right after he died, or right about the time of his death. Like a bunch of bands and other pop culture references were made about his work, and his work was being used. So that kind of astonished me. I mean, not that I knew very much about Magritte anyway. You learn about him in art history, of course, but oh, the pipe, the bowler, the apple, naked ladies. Okay. You don't find out about what his personal life was like, really. So that was kind of an interesting thing to me, that, well, here was this guy who was very influential and so well known, and yet in his life, he didn't do so hot.
Yeah, as it usually unfortunately goes,
I
right?
know. I was like, oh, poor Magritte. Not as tragic as Van Gogh, but
Yeah.
like, yeah. So what about you, Yeltsin?
Speaking of Magritte's like sort of, I don't know, like personal life, I will say, like upbringing actually, was something that stood out to me. And I just wonder, I don't know, I just bring a hypothesis more than anything. When Rene Magritte was 13, his mother took her own life. And it was followed by, potentially like mental health, a lot of stuff that just was going on that they maybe didn't even understand. And I think that affects, that affects people, and I think it really affected Rene Magritte in a lot of different ways. So part of that is like some of the subject matter in his work is sort of a veiled woman, and that's meant to be his mother. But my sort of hypothesis is that I find it interesting that that surrealism, and it's also interesting that like you didn't gain any really notoriety until people were kind of like, hey, that's kind of trippy, like the work that it was made here. Like it's just kind of interesting work. But just surrealism as a movement, as an art movement, is really indicative of like sort of the culture of the time again, of these advancements in psychology and like and Freudian thought and then those sort of things. So I wonder if this sort of like all melds together in his work of sort of this idea of mental health, and maybe the idea of understanding the mind and understanding people on a different level, because a lot of work, at least surrealism is like this sort of idea that our dreams and our dreams sort of like become reality or inform our reality in a certain way. And of course that leads into the sort of hippie culture of sort of altering reality in a sort of way. So I find that interesting that it's a sort of like thing that kind of bubbles up in different ways. But I just wonder, I don't know, it's I don't call it a theory, but I would say maybe like a hypothesis or something, that potentially I wonder if mental health was a big sort of like catalyst or something that to kind of inform surrealist artwork. Like a lot of the work, sort of Salvador Dali, was about dreams and time and sort of all these sort of different things in nature, sort of like sciences that we were beginning to understand because of advancements, or we just started putting our minds toward it.
I did uncover this one thing about him where he said when he was like, I forget how old he was, maybe he was still young, and he saw Giorgio de Chirico's painting. I forget the title of it, I'll find it. And he said when he saw it, he like cried or something. He was overcome with emotion. It moved him that much, because he said, that's the first time I've seen a painting of a thought, of what's happening in people's minds, I guess. So I look at the painting and I'm like, just looks like one of those random still lifes, like looks like a cast of a head and like a geometric shape and a little cloth folded over. Okay, so to us it might be kind of trite, because that is kind of what you paint in like, painting 101 or a still life painting or whatever. But at the time it was revolutionary. So yeah, it just really like makes me think about all these things, that all these tropes that now we take for granted because they've been around for so long. But you realize that it was revolutionary to people at one time to see an image like that. Yeah, so I definitely think he was very much occupied with his thoughts, other people's thoughts, and obviously, like, I do think his works, where he talks about, how this is not a pipe, this is not a, whatever, and that is super revolutionary. And yeah, so I kind of got to delve a little bit deeper into him, just other than the little captions that you read in your art history book. So, uh, and also how I guess one of his paintings was stolen, and he was so famous that, like, the thieves realized they couldn't sell that anymore because nobody wanted to buy it because it's too recognizable as a stolen artwork. And so it was returned 3 years later in perfect condition. I thought that was a very funny fact.
That's amazing. There you go. I guess anti-theft once you get famous enough.
Right.
Before you die, there has to be like a certain time period. But going back to that conversation, think of Edvard Munch and the Scream, right? Like, he was also dealing with depression, and yet he created this amazing lithograph and painting of the Scream, and now it's one of the most recognizable famous paintings you can think of. So, and I mean, the three of us being artists, we touch base with that as well. Our thought process, the way that we feel, ends up on canvas, and it's part of what drives our art making practices. So, but yeah, to think of it as a way that was very revolutionary at the time, and like having to deal with a suicidal event in your life of a parent, I definitely could create an entire life worth of work, which is essentially what we have here with Rene Magritte. But yeah, I think it's really interesting and important to discuss.
So he married his sort of childhood sweetheart, and I guess like a little after their marriage, well, I don't know how far into marriage they were at the time, but he was embarking on an affair with this other woman, and he had asked one of his friends to keep his wife occupied, while he was off having this affair.
Oh
well, that friend ended up having an affair with his wife. And
no.
So they were estranged for like 4 years, but then they reconciled after that. And, and I'm just like, okay, still pretty crazy. Some weird stuff happening. Good for Rene.
Sure. I guess to tie it all in with, we're now leaving pandemic, but a little fun fact as well that I also learned about him was that he didn't have a studio. So he actually painted in his lounge. And so as we were in the last year and a half working out of our own homes, Rene Magritte did it too. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people did that, probably.
Yeah,
I don't know, but he had a lounge.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true.
Well, I think it was Morris Lewis that has like a bunch of famous painting or pictures of him just like painting in his kitchen or something like that. I just find that kind of cool.
I just did not know how unsuccessful he was for most of his career. I mean, I'm saying in the conventional sense that people would associate with success. And by that measure, I suppose I'm not successful either, but it doesn't matter. I think it's like shedding light on how artistic impulses and output doesn't always reflect how that work was regarded, in that time. And people persevere despite all kinds of negative pressures. Either people like continually say that your work sucks, or it's just not going anywhere, or any of that kind of stuff. And yet, these people, they just kept creating work. And I think that's sort of an important takeaway, is not to silence your creative voice and to keep going. And at the end of the day, I mean, we all started making art because we really wanted to, and we have, things that are interesting to us. So ultimately, I think, we're the final critics. Like, doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, like, who says your work is important or not. I mean, look at Asco, the members of Asco. They were told repeatedly that you're nothing. You don't rate. You're not important. And they just kept going. And, and they had a lot of important things to say, probably a lot more things than that guy, the curator at LACMA.
Right. Yeah, very inspirational.
All right. Thanks for joining us for episode 6 of Mona Lisa Has No Eyebrows. We'll hope you join us again for the next episode. Until then, goodbye.